Hey guys, so this video is on the Cold War and it's going to be mostly content based. I'm just going to go through the key concepts in over maybe 3 videos because I can't get through 50 years in 10 minutes. And I'm going to quickly go through the paper now just so you know what to expect, questions based. So this paper is paper 2 and it's worth 40% of your GCSE. And there's 2 sections. Section A is a period study. So for us it's the Cold War. Section B is a British study. So for us is Henry VIII, but it will change. So be warned, for paper 2 there is 2 sections with 2 different topics on it. So make sure you know that. And then you'll get asked 3 questions on the Cold War. So question 1 asks you to explain 2 consequences of something, and that is 8 marks. Question 2 is asking for a narrative account, which is also 8 marks. And then question 3 is a 60 marker, which will give you 3 bullet points and you have to explain the importance of 2 out of 3 of them. Okay, and now I'm going to go through the beginning of the Cold War and early tensions. So the Cold War started in 1941 with the Grand Alliance between Britain, Churchill, USA, Roosevelt, and then Soviet Union, which was Stalin. And this was often called a marriage of convenience, as although these 3 countries had some differences, they had to work together during World War II, and then they would start to disagree later on, as we see. So there was 3 kind of conferences throughout this time. There was Tehran in November 1943, where just a few things were agreed. So USA and Britain agreed to open a second front on France, which meant pressure would be eased off Stalin. And then the Soviet Union would declare war on Japan once World War II was over. Soviet Union would engage with Poland and the UN would be established. So tensions were all pretty low here. And then there was Yalta in February 1945, where Soviet Union would declare war on Japan, Germany would be divided into 4 zones, the United Nations would be set up, and Stalin wanted all communist countries to join. However, this was refused as the capitalist countries didn't want the power balance to be shifted, because if there was too many communist countries in the UN, then decisions would be made to influence communist ideals, which they didn't want. And there was also some disagreement about Poland's borders with Stalin. And now the final conference is Potsdam in July 1945. And there were some different leaders this time because Roosevelt had died, so Truman was replaced. And both Churchill and Attlee, which was the Prime Minister after Churchill, attended Potsdam. Germany and Berlin was agreed to be divided, as was previously, into 4 zones. So Britain, USA, France and Soviet Union would all get a zone each. But the Soviet Union would get 25% of output from the other zones because they were given the Eastern zone, which is the poorest. And then there are also some disagreements about reparations because the Soviet Union wanted to give Germany high reparations, which basically means Germany would have to pay a lot of money. But then USA and Britain didn't really want this because they were worried that it would kind of cause resentment like what happened after World War I. And so Stalin also refused these free elections in European countries, which was agreed previously, which really annoyed Truman, and he kind of tension started to build and he wanted to start get tough policy. So basically wanted to act harsher on the Soviet Union to stop Soviet influence spreading. And then tensions increased further with the USA dropping 2 atomic bombs, 1 on Hiroshima, 1 on Nagasaki in Japan. And this caused the Soviet Union to kind of fear USA and the power they had. So they decided to build a buffer zone, which basically meant they wanted to create communist countries around the Soviet Union to protect them from the West and their influence. And also, just make sure you're aware that at this point Britain kind of leaves the Cold War because Britain was so economically exhausted after World War II, and Attlee wanted to focus on rebuilding Britain and didn't want to get involved in any more problems within the world. So next, now there's 2 telegrams which are given. There's first a long telegram in 1946, and this is a report from the US ambassador in Moscow. And he basically said that Soviets saw capitalism as a threat, and they felt that capitalism needs to be destroyed in order to maintain the safety of the Soviet Union. And this influenced the policy of containment for the USA, which is basically they wanted to contain all communism within Eastern Europe and not let it spread any further. And then there's also the, I can't pronounce this, Novikov telegram in 1946, which is pretty much the same, but from the Soviet ambassador this time, he would have been in the US. And he basically said that the USA wanted world domination and wanted capitalism and their ideals to take over, which obviously caused a lot of fear in the Soviet Union, and they felt that they needed protection against this, which leads into satellite states and Soviet expansion. So between 1947 and 1949, the Soviet Union wanted to spread its influence over the Eastern Bloc of Europe. And so to do this, they made satellite states, which basically meant that they made fixed elections in these countries and often intimidated voters, and also staged coups to put pro-communist governments in. So basically, he's making all the countries surrounding the Soviet Union turn communist as well. And so this put a lot of pressure on the USA. This buffer zone, as it was called, was quite intimidating, and also the USA saw this as a betrayal of the Yalta Agreement. So this one made the USA want to react. And the problem was, after World War II, there was a lot of economic devastation within Europe. Some countries were really struggling, and this makes communism look like an attractive option. And so to avoid this, Truman did a speech to Congress called the Truman Doctrine. I'm going to say Truman Doctrine. I'm not sure if that's pronounced right. I'm sorry if it's not. But basically, this was a speech that he made where he announced $400 million to Greece and Turkey because he wanted to stop communism growing. This was an act for his policy of containment. And then also the Marshall Plan followed this, which was in 1947. And this, again, was kind of the Truman Doctrine put into action. So they gave $13 billion to help rebuild 16 countries in Europe. The Soviet Union did not like this, surprisingly, and they called it dollar imperialism, which basically meant they thought it was a way for USA to kind of like buy countries' influences. And this also led to Churchill's Iron Curtain speech in 1946, because as these tensions were rising, he basically made a speech saying that there was an Iron Curtain being drawn up within Europe, splitting the East and the Soviets from the capitalists and the West. The Soviet Union now, after seeing the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, also decided to do things similar. So they created Comecon in 1949, which stands for the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance, which is basically their alternative to the Marshall Plan. So they gave aid to Soviet countries. And then also Cominform was in 1947, which stands for the Communist Information Bureau. This basically just organised communist parties and arranged leadership and was just a kind of propaganda technique. And then as a consequence of this, NATO was set up in 1949, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, which is basically a collective security for Western capitalist countries. So it allowed them to kind of give each other military assistance, and said if a Western country was like under threat by Soviets, the other countries in NATO would come in and help. Okay, now I'm going to focus on Germany in the Cold War for a little bit. So the USA, France and Britain wanted to build up Germany to make it powerful again, but then Stalin wanted to kind of keep Germany weak and down so they wouldn't be able to rise up again like Hitler did. And so because they were getting no cooperation from the Soviets, the Britain, USA and France decided to bring their zones together and create Trizonia, and they also made their own currency. And this annoyed the Soviets as they kind of felt threatened by this. And so in June 1948, the Soviet Union closed road, rail and canal links into West Berlin. So basically this was called the Berlin Blockade because they blocked any access into Berlin. Like it wasn't possible for anyone to get into West Berlin, because if you can picture Germany like that, Berlin's on this side and it's on a separate space. So you can get through West Germany, but you couldn't get into West Berlin, which obviously caused problems for the people in West Berlin because they couldn't get food, any kind of resources. And so the USA responded with the Berlin Airlift. So basically they flew in supplies for over a year until the Soviets decided to take down this blockade, and then this made the Soviets look quite aggressive and threatening. And then as a response of this, West Germany was officially formed, and so was East Germany.